Hello there, welcome to what may be a series of videos for GCSE Religious Studies. It's the AQA specification. This particular video is on answering 12-mark questions, and I'm focusing on the thematic studies. In particular, I'm focusing on Buddhism and Christianity because they're the two religions that my students are studying, and this video is basically for them. It may seem sort of, self-evident, but the 12-mark questions are the most important. They're worth 50% of the GCSE, and because of that, they are the most important questions within the exam. They're also the only questions where you can receive up to 3 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Now, you'll only be awarded up to 3 marks for one answer, but that answer will be your highest graded answer. So it's well worth ensuring that spelling, punctuation and grammar is focused on, because that could get you the 3 additional marks, and that could make the difference between one grade and another. I've put on there the question, why do you need to give these questions priority? And as I say, it's fairly self-evident why you need to give them that priority. If you miss them, or even if you miss a couple of them, you're going to severely hamper your chances to get that level 4 or 5, and you're certainly not going to be able to achieve anything above a level 5 if you start missing out these questions. How you go about answering them is entirely up to you, or at least the order in which you answer them is entirely up to you. I saw one student who answered the 5-mark questions first in every theme, and that seemed to work quite well. They obviously were able to give that 12-mark question the time it required before going on to the other questions. That's something you could try, but when faced with the exam, you might not want to do that. That's, as I say, entirely up to you. But there are some simple things which students can do, which will mean that they will get a decent mark. So I would say that these are some points to think about, and you need to ask yourself the question, are you guilty of these? First of all, I've seen, and this is not only from my students, but also students in other schools when I've been marking their exam papers, that they make kind of, sweeping generalizations or things which are just plainly wrong. One of the favourite is to say Roman Catholics believe in X and Christians believe in Y. Roman Catholics are Christians, they're simply a different denomination. So you need to make sure you don't fall into that trap. There's also the problem of using lazy language. By using lazy language, what I mean is people making sort of generalized sweeping statements. All Christians believe in X, all Christians believe in Y, which are sometimes not correct. So you've got to be very careful of that. Saying, for example, modern day Christians. Now, to me, a modern day Christian is someone who's alive today. You might mean something very different from that, but you need to think about, that kind of language. There's also the problem of conflating 2 different arguments. In other words, putting 2 different arguments together and saying that they mean the same thing, and that's not always the case. So, for example, I have seen people say an eye for an eye means that Christians want revenge, as in turn the other cheek. Now, clearly that's not true. Eye for an eye basically means you're going after revenge, and turn the other cheek basically means that you're forgiving the person who's caused you harm. They're not the same thing at all. So be careful how you use quotes. Don't just put them in there because you think that quotes need to go in there. They do. Make sure that you're using them correctly and applying them in the right place. The other thing that you need to think about, particularly with Christianity, is to be aware of whether the issue is denominational or not. Now, as you should know, Christianity is a big club, and there are various different sort of little clubs within that who believe in slightly different things. So, for example, Roman Catholics don't believe in abortion, but liberal Protestants accept it in some circumstances. Again, be careful of lazy language. I have seen people writing things down like liberal Protestants like abortion. They don't like abortion, they accept that unfortunately it may be necessary on occasions. Also, be careful that you are specifying liberal Protestants. There are some Protestants, for example, some Protestant denominations in places like Northern Ireland, who are strongly opposed to abortion. So not all Protestants accept that abortion is okay. So abortion is a good example of where there are denominational differences. However, that doesn't apply to every single topic. When, for example, it comes to the death penalty, Christians within the same denomination may have very different opinions. So, for example, were we to go to a liberal Protestant church and ask members of the congregation what they think about the death penalty, some people will say that it's okay in some circumstances, and some people will say that it's not okay in any circumstances. Same church, different views. So one of the things that you might want to know is, what are those denominational differences? Where do they apply? If you don't know them or you're not sure about them, my suggestion is that you create a chart to show these differences. It could be just a very simple chart you stick up on the wall. It gives the denomination, and you don't need to know every single one, just the main ones, and you just put down their position on certain topics, for example, same-sex marriage, etc. The more familiar with that, the less likely you are to make mistakes. Now, when it comes to the marking criteria, examiners on the mark scheme can give you an award based on 4 different levels. Level 0, as it might suggest, is basically that someone has written down something nothing worthy of credit. What do they mean by that? Well, basically, you can't read it, it's complete nonsense, or it just rephrases the question in a different form of words, so it doesn't actually make any points whatsoever. A level 1 is the fact that you put down a point of view with a reason. So you might sort of say something like, Christians don't believe in the death penalty because it causes harm to other people. That's a kind of 1 mark question. There's no sort of subtle differentiation, differences. You've said that it's all Christians, so it's only really worth 1 mark, 2 marks maybe at most. When you start to go up the levels, level 2 is that you've given reasoned consideration of a point of view, and you can see that from the arguments, a logical chain of reasoning, and you've recognised perhaps different points of view. However, there isn't any reference to religion. Now, that's something that you need to be aware of. I've seen some fantastic answers which are really detailed, but with no reference to religion whatsoever. At most, they can only achieve 6 marks. Now, when you get onto level 3 and 4, what you're doing is obviously continuing to apply those kind of considered points of view, that logic, etc. But you're applying it clearly and obviously putting in there a clear reference to religion. Now, level 4 is quite difficult to achieve. You need to have given a sophisticated argument. It's obviously got to have an introduction, it's got to have a conclusion, it's got to have clear references to religion, including quotes. So it's quite difficult to achieve that, especially, 12 marks. Perhaps a borderline sort of level 3, level 4 answer, slightly easier to achieve. I would certainly say that most people are capable of a level 3 response. Most people are capable of putting an argument together with references to religion and getting between 7 and 9 marks. Now, if you're doing that consistently across all 4 answers, you're talking, healthy a number of marks that you're achieving. Plus, if your spelling, punctuation and grammar is good, you've also got the 3 extra bonus marks for a clear answer. So it's well worth practicing these questions and how you order them, and obviously making sure that you have a clear introduction and conclusion and that there is no waffle. Basically, the more waffle there is, you're not going to get any marks to achieve it. So you need to be clearly focused. I've seen some really, really long answers where half of the page doesn't get any marks whatsoever because it's not relevant to that particular question. Okay, so this year, I'm talking about 2018, the themes that I've asked my students to concentrate on were relationships in the family, religion and life, religion, peace and conflict, and religion, crime and punishment. In relationships and families, the question was, for religious believers, sexual relationships should only take place within marriage. For religion and life, it was abuse of the environment is impossible to stop. For religion, peace and conflict, it was war is the best way to solve problems between countries. And lastly, theme E, religion, crime and punishment, it was the death penalty should never be used. Now notice they're all the same. They're a statement and they expect you to respond to the statement by putting points for and against. It's the same format for every single question, and that's not likely to change. The other thing that you should notice is that you can actually recycle some of the quotes that you use. For example, theme D and theme E, you could use the quote, thou shalt not kill, for both of them. So there's no problem there. You won't be marked down. You've given a religious quote and there isn't a problem with that. Okay, so if we apply that to a particular question, I'm going to choose theme B, religion and life. And the question is, abuse of the environment is impossible to stop. Now, I think that's quite a difficult question. You've obviously got to start with an introduction. I would suggest you say something along the lines of, some religious believers believe that abuse of the environment is impossible to stop. However, some religious believers think that the environment and abuse to it can be stopped and that they have a duty to do so. Now, there are some key terms, and as I said, I'm focusing on Buddhism and Christianity, which you could apply to this. For Buddhism, you could use interdependence, impermanence, suffering, and harm. For Christianity, you could talk about stewardship, dominion, things like Judgment Day, and also you can bring in your own points of view. Again, there isn't a problem bringing in your own points of view. You will be awarded marks for it, but you need to balance your own points of view with religious points of view to get the higher level. So you could bring in things like pollution, lifestyle, sustainability. So you could say that on the one hand, abuse of the environment is impossible to stop, that basically we've created pollution so far and that actually we can't turn back the clock. You could mention people's lifestyles, the fact that they like driving cars, etc. And you could mention that. On the other hand, you could say that we're heading towards a more sustainable environment with people being more environmentally aware. And then in there, you mix it up with your religion. So Buddhism believes that there's an interdependence between things. However, they also believe in impermanence, so things changing. You could talk about suffering caused by damage to the environment and the harm caused by damage to the environment. For Christianity, you could talk about stewardship and the fact that God has given us the earth to look after. You could talk about dominion. So he's basically said, here you are, here's the earth. You can have it and do what you want with it, but at the same time, I want you to look after it. And you could talk about Judgment Day. So you can use these terms to create a balanced argument. So you might want to go away, have a think about how you do that. Lastly, I just wanted to give you some pointers for the other questions. And again, it might be a good idea to go away and have a think about how you would answer these. So when it comes to the question on relationships in the family, the question was, for religious believers, sexual relationships should only take place within marriage. So you could approach that from an adultery point of view, or you could, and most people did, think about the question from a sex before marriage point of view. The one thing that people did when answering this question was talk a lot about contraception and having children, etc. And as I say, sometimes the focus went more towards contraception and what different religious believers think about that, and didn't necessarily answer the question directly. So be careful of that. Theme D, religion, peace and conflict. War is the best way to solve problems between countries. You could think about Quakers, just war theory, do not kill, eye for an eye, first moral precept, etc. Theme E, religion, crime and punishment. The death penalty should never be used. Again, think about the first moral precept, do not kill, etc. So as I say, there's no problem, recycling some of the stuff that you know for other questions. So basically, it's over to you. There is now one proper exam paper, and obviously in future years that will increase, and so we'll be able to see patterns within the exams, hopefully. But in the meantime, do have a think about these questions and how you're going to answer them. 12-mark questions, you just can't ignore them.